Welcome to the Art of Parenting, Lesson 2. The title of today's lesson is Parent, the Noun, and the Verb. And I should mention that of all lesson titles, this one I actually think really is appropriate for the lesson we're going to learn today. It really encapsulates the full messages that we're going to be talking about today. I also want to mention that right now you're watching just me teaching a class. Unfortunately, as I was teaching the lesson, I only realized about 20, 30 minutes into the lesson that the recording had not begun. And so I am now re-recording just a mock version of the class. Hopefully I'll stitch it together by the end of that class and we'll have a full recording. So last week, we studied about the foundations of parenting. We learned about the perspective and the vision we should have for parenting. Remember the exercise we did about why we have children, right? So we learned that everything we do for our children should always be egoless. It should be child-oriented, not healthy parenting is always thinking what's in the best interest of the child, not what's in our best interest. And secondly, we learned the importance of properly positioning ourselves in the role of parents. Children need parents, right? We learned about this from Anne Frank and her quote. And of course it comes from the fifth of the 10 commandments. Honor your father and your mother, revere your father and mother, etc. We learned about the importance of having a father and mother figure, parental figures in a child's life. We're not their friends. We're not their teachers. We are their parents. So now that we have proper parenting perspective and we know what the proper positioning in the family that we have to serve is, now what? What do we do with that perspective and positioning? What are our parenting goals and how do we go about achieving them? So that's the topic of today's lesson. We are going to begin with a teaser video, as usual, a scenario, and hopefully by the end of today's lesson, you'll have some more insight in what to do in such a case. Please turn your attention to the video screens.
I don't really understand this obsession with Xbox. If I didn't enforce limits, my 14-year-old would play 24/7. I tell myself there are benefits, like, I don't know, good hand-eye coordination, the social and leadership aspect of working together with other kids. Even if the kids are virtual. Honestly, I'm not convinced. I'd really like to see him do something outside of his comfort zone. Something to help others. I suggested that he volunteer at the local soup kitchen, but he turned up his nose. We sat down and discussed other options. Working with disabled kids, being a big brother to the new kid at school. Not interested. My wife and I often volunteer at community events at the local synagogue. I would have thought that this would have made an impact on him. Apparently not. I'm not sure how far to push him. Should I insist? Can I insist? How would you respond?
And that is the topic of today's lesson. That is the topic of today's lesson. What tools can we give our children? How can we inculcate certain behaviors or certain goals or certain desires that we have for a way that they should grow up? And how can we achieve those goals? So we're going to begin with a story about the Rebbe Rashab. Rebbe Rashab, pictured on the screen, Rabbi Shalom Dov Ber Lubavitch, was the fifth in the Chabad dynasty of Rebbes. And we get this story actually as told by his son, the previous Chabad Rebbe, meaning the one before our Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, otherwise known as the Rebbe Rayatz. And these, in text 1 in your books on page 26, is from his memoir. And as he was telling it over from his memories, and he is telling over the story from when he was 7 years old and the impact that it had on him. Text 1. On Rosh Hashanah of 5648, which corresponds to the year 1887, when I was a child of 7 years and several months, I visited my grandmother and she treated me to a melon. I went out to the yard and sat with my friends on a bench directly opposite the window of my father, Rabbi Shalom Dov Ber, the fifth Rebbe of Chabad Lubavitch, and sheared the melon with my friends. Father called me in and said to me, I noticed that you did indeed share with your friends, but you did not do it with a whole heart. He then explained to me at length the idea of a generous eye and a begrudging eye. what in Hebrew is known as tov ayin and ra ayin. Okay? I was so deeply affected by father's words that I was unable to recover for half an hour. I wept bitterly and threw up what I had eaten of the melon. What do you want from the child? Asked my mother. Father replied, it is good this way. Now the trait of generosity will be ingrained in his character. This, the previous Rebbe finishes off, this is education. You know, in the live class, when we read this text, a lively discussion ensued. Hold on a second. Let's try to apply this to our lives. Do we really feel that this is a parenting moment, if you will? This is education, really? Let me paint this picture in my house. My son, my daughter is 8 years old. And they're having a play date. A friend is over to play. And I'm just observing from afar, you know, typical parenting. Maybe I'm sitting with the other mom and we're, you know, the other dad, and we're sitting and schmoozing. All right, beautiful. And we're watching from the corner of our eye, and we see, let's say there's a new remote control car, whatever it is, and my child is struggling to share it with the other child. Inwardly, you could see he doesn't want to. It's new. It's a birthday present, whatever it is. We all know the story, right? And I don't get involved. And all of a sudden, I see him overcome it. And maybe the other friend says, "Can you please share with me?" And he says, "You know what? I'm going to share with you. It's the right thing to do. I'm going to share with you, but I don't really want to, whatever." Right? And he gives it to him. So he's sharing, but it's a little begrudging. From my perspective, I would be thrilled. As a parent, I would probably text my wife and say to her, "I'm so proud of our son. You know what he did. You know how you know." But here, the Rebbe is the opposite. Like, I wouldn't see this as a situation that warrants parental intervention. To the contrary, I would pat myself on the back and say, "Great, good job. I'm so glad that he's growing up properly and he's growing up with certain values." I think we're going to put this aside. We're going to come back to this story, and hopefully by the end of the lesson, you'll have a slightly different perspective on where the Rebbe Rashab, the father in this story, was coming from. Before we continue going, we are going to do one more exercise before we start. And that is on page 28. We're asking a simple question, but one that perhaps we don't often ask about parenting. We talk to our spouses all the time about our children and how they're growing up and how we can work on them, etc. But do we ever make a list? What are the goals as a parent that we would like to see our child inculcated within our child? In the live class, I took some examples. Some people said they want their children to be proudly Jewish, observantly Jewish. Other people said they want their children to be independent, happy, things like that. And I pointed out that the answers kind of structure themselves into two different categories. One category is outcomes, right? Nobody said rich. And I'm proud of that. We shouldn't have a desire for our children to grow up rich. We should have a desire for our children to grow up happy, etc. Right? But even that, to be rich, to be happily married, to be successful, these are outcomes. And I think we have to always clarify to ourselves that as parents, we don't have control over the outcomes of our children. We want our children to be healthy, as another people always say, happy and healthy, right? Healthy is not something we have full control over. Sure, we can inculcate in our children good values, good eating habits, etc. But to outcomes, we don't control the outcomes. Okay, so in today's lesson, we're going to focus mainly on values and character traits, right? We wish for our children to be industrious. We want them to be kind. We want them to be frum, religious to one degree or another, whatever degree we want. And these things are things that we should have a list of in our mind, but also we should have a goal in our head of what's the how. How do we go about actually parenting properly? And in today's lesson, we are going to present this as a two-pronged approach. And that's the title of today's lesson, Parenting, the Noun and the Verb. We are going to begin with the noun, right? Parenting, the noun. How do we achieve these goals? We want our children to be industrious. We want our children to be independent. We want our children to be religious, proudly Jewish, whatever, right? How do we go about doing that? We would be wise to do one more exercise, which is to think about the things that are most important to us that we learned from our parents. Take a moment, take 30 seconds, pause the video, and write down some things that you remember learning from your parents. In the class, I shared that I remember two things that I learned from my father, specifically. One of them is consistent Torah study. And the second one was always being ready to do a favor, to help out another, etc. But the follow-up to this exercise is, think about when your parents taught you these lessons. Most likely, the most important things that you learned from your parents, they didn't tell you even once in your life. Isn't that interesting? My father never sat me down and told me, it's important for you to study Torah every day. He never said it to me. My father never said to me, it's important that when somebody needs help, you do them a favor. But my father lived this way. I observed this as a child, and it became so ingrained within me just by watching my father. That's the only way that I know how to live. My father had a chavruta, a study partner, who used to come over to our house, or he used to go over to their house at about 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, whatever it is, as bedtime was kind of winding down. And I'm sure they would communicate and figure out what the right time to study was, etc. When they couldn't make it over to each other's houses because it was snowing outside, there's a blizzard or whatever, they called each other on the phone. I watched this. I grew up with this. And this became so important to me that that's why to me it's so important to study Torah every day. My father helped out so many friends and family members and even acquaintances they didn't need to help out. Gave them loans, and I knew that he wasn't getting paid back those loans, or I remember once he went down to bail somebody out of he was being detained and he needed to be put out on bail, and he went out to bail him out. He did these kind of things on a routine basis. He would give the shirt off his back. And that's where I learned that kind of value from. But he never said these things to me. And I think this leads to the first way that we parent our children. And that is by role modeling. Parent the noun. Think about it. The word parenting is both a verb, it's something we actively do, but it's also a noun. It's who we are. I pointed out in the class, I don't want to go off too much on a tangent, but I pointed out in the class that we're still waiting for the word spousing to become a word as well. Because spouse also, we should be a spouse to the noun, be a good spouse, but we should also be, spousing should be a verb. Imagine if you were talking to a friend and you said, oh, I got to go home, I have some spousing to do, I know we have date night and we have other things like that, right? But to spend time investing in a relationship, etc. But for now, with parenting, we do have that. In English, to parent is a verb, and to be a parent is a noun. And I think it's so important to remember that. We all know the futility of telling our children, do as I say, not as I do. It simply doesn't work, right? And the Khatam Sofer by Moshe Sofer, you can read a little bit more about in his bio on the side, in text 2 on page 30, makes this point. I'll read it. Those who teach Torah to children should be exceedingly devout and God-fearing, because words that emanate from a reverent heart penetrate the hearts of the young listeners and instill in them love and awe of God. The opposite is also true. If the teacher's heart is not true to God, even if he is a scholar and pedagogue, his work is fraudulent and he destroys his charges. With this principle in mind, we can understand the sequence of verses in the Shema prayer. These words that I command you this day shall be upon your heart, and you shall teach them to your children. Think about it. When we say the Shema every single day, whether you're putting on tefillin or you say it in the morning or at night before the children go to sleep, whatever it is, right? We say, and these words which I teach you should be on your heart. And then the next words are, you just teach them to your children. The Khatam Sofer sees in this significance. He says the best way to teach your children is to actively be a good role model about it. One of my father's best friends, and subsequently I'm friends with one of his children, is a man by the name of Benji Stock. And his father was one of the old characters in Crown Heights, where I grew up in Brooklyn. His name was Shimshon Stock, and he had a very, very close relationship with the Rebbe. And we're going to see a documentary, an interview that he did with him. He had a very close relationship with the Rebbe. We're not going to watch the whole interview. It's a 20-minute interview. He talks about how when he was a teenager, he was what we would call today a troubled youth, and he used to go, he's just like going to the movies and ditching school and playing baseball and all that sort of thing. And he tells all about it and how the Rebbe actually had a very close relationship with him. Even as a teenager, the Rebbe studied with him one-on-one, before the Rebbe became Rebbe and even afterwards a little. Anyways, so he talks about an audience when he spoke to the Rebbe about educating his child, this Benji, who's my father's age. Please turn your attention to the video screens.
Benji was born in 58. So it'd be 3 years later. So I went in with him to the Rebbe. I took my little daughter in too. We both all went in, Martha, me, and the two children. And I told him Benji is becoming 3 years old. And he was speaking to us about our life, how's business, and how's things going. And I said to the Rebbe, I want a bracha, just one thing. I want to be a chassid and a lamdan. And he says to me, Shimshon, you have to show him. He can't do it on his own. You have to teach him. If you'll be that, he'll be that.
Such powerful words, but also words that we all know. We need to live a certain way in order for our children to model that behavior, in order for them to grow up the way we want them to. A classic example of this, we're going to go through now 3 examples of this that we see in the Torah. One classic example of this is Joseph, right? Let me just remind you all the story. Joseph is Jacob's favorite son. He has 12 sons, and he's his favorite son. And the brothers are jealous, and the brothers decide to sell him down to Egypt. First, they want to murder him. Eventually, they decide to sell him as a slave. He's sold as a slave to some spice merchants, eventually to another person, and eventually becomes a slave by one of the big hotshots in Egypt, a man by the name of Potiphar. Now, Mrs. Potiphar had a thing for Joseph, and on multiple occasions, she tried to seduce him. And the Torah tells us, Vayihi Hayom, the day comes, and Potiphar's wife decided that this is the day she's going to make it happen. She feigned illness. Everyone else was out of the house. And the Medrash tells us that not only was this the day that she was planning to make it happen, this was also the day that Joseph was planning to give into it. For context, Joseph is 17 years old. Can you blame him? His brothers forsook him. His parents forsook him. He feels all alone in the world. This woman is interested in him and wants him. Not only is she trying to seduce him, she's also threatening him that if he doesn't do it, she's going to, which by the way, she acts on it. When in the end he doesn't, she acts on it, he gets thrown into prison as a result. So what happened? There's this one word in the Torah, Vayimayin, and Joseph refused. How did he have the self-discipline? How did he have the fortitude to be able to overcome this particularly big challenge? I think many of us can try to put ourselves in the same situation and think about it. It's a pretty hefty challenge. So the Medrash in text 3 discusses it. There's 2 opinions, but it's the same idea. Rav Huna said in the name of Rav Matna, we're on page 30, he saw the visage of his father Jacob and it cooled his blood. Rabbi Menachema said in the name of Rabbi Yami, he saw the visage of his mother Rachel and it cooled his blood. Joseph finds himself in a situation as a teenager when he has every right to be shirking every single responsibility in the world, every right to be shirking every single one of the things he grew up with, etc. But he grew up with holy parents. The very notion of his father and mother thinking about the act that he was going to do gave him the strength and the fortitude to overcome it. How lucky would we be if when our children are teenagers, and they're in high school, and their peers are all doing something and they get swept up in these things, and the very notion of their parents being disappointed in it, or this not being the type of lifestyle their parents want them to grow up in, that stops them from doing it. This is true role modeling. We see this role modeling, this positive role modeling with Jacob and Rachel modeling for their son Joseph, and the fortitude that it gave him later in life. But the same is true really in the reverse. So far, we've given an example of positive parenting. The same is true in the reverse. If we model bad behavior, our children are likely to follow suit. Take a look at this warning. Text 4 is from the Talmud. The Talmud tells us in Sukkah, Lo lema inish liyanuka. Do not tell a child that you will give him or her something and then not give it, for the child will thus be taught to say falsehood. We think about this all the time, right? It's common parenting advice. Don't promise something to a child. Don't tell them you'll be able to have it after dinner if you're not planning to give it to them after dinner. Don't lie to your children. Don't fail to fulfill a promise to a child, etc. Right? But what's the reason we usually give for it? The reason we usually give for it is because it takes away trust. It erodes trust that there is in the parents, right? But here the Talmud is reminding us of something else. You are teaching your child to lie. Is that something we want to do? You're modeling lying behavior for your child. Dishonest. We can't tell our children, we need to be honest, you need to be honest, you can never lie, you always need to tell the truth, you always need to do the right thing. But when we go to Disney World and they're 4 years old, and the cutoff for a free ticket is 5 years old, is 3 years old, and we tell them, just tell them you're 3. We are, and that's even involving them, but even if we're not involving them, right? If they watch us do dishonest things, if they watch us tell white lies all the time, and they're like, hey, how did you let, and then we tell them to be honest, what are they going to listen to? Of course, they're going to listen to the role modeling, right? Now, at the risk of being a little exhaustive, we're going to share one more example, but I want to clarify something. In this example, we're going to see something very interesting. We're going to see that sometimes we can actually simultaneously be transmitting both a positive and a negative behavior by modeling. This is such a fascinating story. So this is a story about a man whose name is Eliphaz. Comes to us from Rashi on the Torah. The story goes as follows. Jacob is running away from his brother Esau. If you're not familiar with the story of Yaakov and Esau, the only thing you need to know is that his brother is trying to murder him. Esau, Jacob's brother, is trying to murder him. Now, Jacob is fleeing, he's running away, and he's caught up. Someone catches up to him, and his name is Eliphaz. Who was Eliphaz? Jacob's son. Miriam, can you read for us, please? Text 5. What happens when Eliphaz catches up to Jacob?
Sure. Esau commanded his son Eliphaz to pursue Jacob and kill him. But because Eliphaz had grown up in Isaac's lap, he was reluctant to kill Jacob. Eliphaz said to Jacob, "What shall I do about my father's command?" Said Jacob, "Take everything I own, and a pauper is like a dead man."
Which is discussed by the commentary. Basically, somebody who has no money is considered on one level dead because he has no possessions. Big discussion about exactly what that means. But suffice to say, this was kind of like their workaround, how Eliphaz can still listen to his father and kill Jacob, while at the same time not actually kill him, right? Now, I just want to point out the absurdity of Eliphaz's moral dilemma. I'll put it in air quotes, moral dilemma, right? He wants to kill Jacob because his father said so, out of kibbud of aim, out of respect for his father. Hold on a second. Respecting your father doesn't necessarily mean killing him. How do you end up in a situation where murder, because you're respecting your father, is a good thing? There's so much conflation here of values. What's going on? And Rashi is, and I'm sorry, the commentary here explain that the reason is because they both come from the same place. Eliphaz watched his father Esau, and these were both characters that he got by modeling Esau's behavior. What happens? Esau was famous for having unbelievable kibbud avayim, honoring unbelievable honor for his father. He respected his father beyond the norm. According to many opinions, it is for this reason that his father didn't even know that he was wicked. He kept his wickedness from his father. He consciously asked his father all sorts of convoluted Torah questions, complicated, sophisticated Torah questions in order to give him the impression that but then he would go out, and outside the house, he would kill and murder and plunder and all the rest. So what did his son learn? His son learned two things at the same time. Number one, he learned from him unbelievable, unwavering honor for his father. So if his father told him to listen, he has to listen. But murder? That wasn't such a big deal. So he comes to Yaakov, and he has a problem, right? So here's the deal. He didn't learn from his father not to murder. No, that only happened from his grandfather, from Yitzchak. What does it say? He grew up in Isaac's lap. That's why he was reluctant. But so far as his father was concerned, he would have been fine to kill him. Now, I know that this story kind of sounds scary, right? Because we're like, oh, I'm transmitting good values to my children. I'm transmitting bad values to my children. And thank you so much. I came to another parenting course in order that I should feel even more guilty about the fact that I don't have my anger issues under control, or maybe sometimes I raise my voice, or maybe sometimes I don't have patience. And okay, thank you so much. I'm ruining my children even more, right? Perfect. Now you checked off the box for a parenting course. But I actually think there's a lesson the exact opposite way here. I think there's something beautiful about looking at this story, because it's extreme, by the way, and seeing that it's never parenting, role modeling, the role modeling version of parenting is never an all or nothing game. In other words, you can be giving negative character traits to your children by role model, and you can work on that and try to get better at that. But that doesn't take away from the good character traits. Children know how to see both. And I think that this kind of concludes the importance of role modeling. And by the way, we have so many examples of this in our own lives. Think of the fact that sometimes you're at the dinner table and your child is picking from the salad bowl, right? And you say to them, "Don't pick from the salad bowl. That's gross. That's disgusting, etc." And then we get on the phone, right? And absentmindedly you take a piece of vegetable out of the salad bowl. It happens all the time. And I think we have to remind ourselves that that if we want our children to appreciate the value of something, we want to appreciate them the value of prayer. Let them see us praying. I come to people's houses to put on tefillin with them sometimes, and they tell me, "Oh, let's go into this room on the side. I don't want to be disturbed by my children." And I say to them, "Listen, I appreciate the fact you don't want to be disturbed by your children, but you know what the value of your children seeing you putting on tefillin and seeing you praying for a moment is? That's unbelievable." The Rebbe would often tell people that if they study Torah, parents, obviously, most of the studying Torah that they do is after hours, right? It's got to be after the kids are in bed. Otherwise, you don't have any time. So the Rebbe would say, leave the books out. Let the children see. I know you want to put them back on the table, but let your children see that after they went to sleep, you were studying Torah. And sadly, I think role modeling is often overlooked by parents today. We're so busy parenting the verb that we forget about being an actual parent, being a good role model for our children. Parenting begins with focusing on ourselves. Now, is this the sum total of parenting? Absolutely not. Just role modeling? No, certainly not. If you take a look in text 6, which I'll just read, it's from Proverbs, from Mishlei, which was written by King Solomon. He says, "Chanoch lanar al pi darko." Educate a child according to his way. Gam ki yaskin lo yaser mimena. Even when he grows old, he will not turn away. In other words, if we put in the effort to actually role model, if we put in the effort, in addition to role modeling, to tailoring it to the personal child, then we will get a lot further in our parenting. And I think this is where we're going to start expanding the role of parenting. Number one is we have to educate a child according to their way specifically. But what else? Tarlan, you want to read for us, please? We're holding text 7. If you're not available to, just wave me on. Or Shelly, you have your book with you?
No.
No? Okay.
No.
Anybody else? Okay, so we're back to you, Matt. Go ahead. Text 7 is from Hayom Yom, and it's the previous Rebbe describing the importance of thinking every day, of focusing on child rearing.
All right. My father, Rabbi Shalom Dovber Lubavitch, once proclaimed, just as wearing tefillin every day is a biblical mitzvah that applies to every Jewish man, regardless of the standing in Torah, whether a great scholar or a simple person, so too it is an absolute duty for every person to spend half an hour every day thinking about the education of children. We must do everything within our power, and even that which is seemingly beyond our power, to inspire children to follow the path we envision for them.
So I think thank you, Matt. I think from the two quotes that we have here on the screen, we really get a little bit of a fuller picture of parenting. Even the best parents, who are stellar role models, need a proactive game plan for educating their children. Parenting cannot be just a noun, as we've been discussing till now in the class. Right about now, we're going to pivot and we're going to start to talk about the verb, the active parenting. But the first question we need to ask, and we're not going to answer it right now, is why? Why isn't role modeling enough to transmit values to our children? Why can't we just be good, upstanding human beings living in a home together with our children, and they will learn what the good behavior is from us? We just spoke about how much they role model after us. Perfect. So let's just be good, upstanding human beings, and then they'll learn to be good, upstanding human beings after us. I think as we start to go through this last section of the class, which is really the next hour, we're going to see that role modeling itself is not enough for a number of reasons. And therefore, we need to have parenting the noun, which is being a good parent, being an upstanding person, being a good role model, together with active parenting the verb. The next exercise is just fun. So I think it's a good way to introduce text 8. But don't look at text 8 yet. On page 33, we have a learning exercise, okay? When a child is born, and this one everybody can type in the chat. This is not a private topic, but in the chat, type, when a child is born, in your opinion, he or she is comparable to A, a beautiful rose, B, a delicate crystal, C, a holy angel, D, moldable clay, E, a wild donkey, or F, all of the above with the exception of E. Anybody want to type a letter in the chat? Type a letter in the chat. Which one are you on board with? Or you could type your answer. What do you think a child is compared to at that age? Yeah, anybody? Dr. Afshin says an angel. Victoria Chin says a wild donkey, but they can also be as loud as a donkey. Beth Shabby says D, moldable clay. Anybody else?
Oh, I meant F,
A
but
rose.
actually all of them.
Oh, sorry. So Victoria's saying F. In other words, all of them besides her wild donkey, but she's like, you know what? Throw in wild donkey also because they're as loud as a wild donkey. All right. Sarah says a rose. Dr. Afshin says all of them. Anybody else? We should move on. Take a look at text 8. These all seem like strange analogies, Gracie says, but she guesses D, moldable clay. I like it. I like it. Folks, the reason we do this exercise is because take a look at text 8. Turn the page. On page 34, Ve'ayir pere adam yivalid. In Job, the Torah tells us a human is born as a wild donkey. And when we see this, I think as parents, we automatically get all hot and bothered by this. We're like, hold on a second, I'm a little offended for my children. Like, seriously, a child, take a look at the picture on the screen. This is a wild donkey, right? So I think in order to properly appreciate what the Torah is telling us, we have to appreciate what does a wild donkey mean? What is the primary attribute that distinguishes a human being from an animal? Anybody want to chime in here? What do we think the difference between a human being and an animal is?
Reason.
Speech.
Okay, sure. I think there are a lot of animals that speak, maybe not, they don't speak human language, but they have, dolphins definitely communicate with each other, right? As do many other animals, I think. Whales, right? Anything else?
Self-awareness.
Self-awareness is definitely a big one. Yeah. Is that something that we would say only human beings have? I don't know.
Awareness of their own mortality.
Awareness of their own mortality. Yeah. I don't know. There are definitely, awareness is a strong word that makes it sound human, but being afraid of death, I think instinctively a lot of animals fear their own mortality, right? I think there's something else. There's another qualitative difference. By the way, there's other things we could say. There's we could speak of we definitely could speak about human beings' advanced cognition, which I think is where Matt was going with this, and that's definitely part of it. We could also talk about the fact that we're the only ones to have done certain factual things, right? To have developed advanced tools and skills, and and are we the only ones to socially work together as a group? No, not necessarily, right? I think there are certain animal groups that do, but I think there's one qualitative difference between human beings and other creatures that stands out above all the rest. And that is that a human being is the only one to act in a way by choice that is antithetical to their natural instincts. There's a reason why we call it animal instinct. Even when we do something and it's just instinctive, we often say, oh, that's my base animal instinct to do that, right? Human beings have instincts just like every other being on the planet, but we also have the ability to have self-control over those instincts. Now let's move on to the second part of it. So first of all, an animal, but what is a wild donkey? Of all animals, the Torah compares a young child to a wild donkey. A wild donkey is first of all wild, totally untamed, but also donkeys are, at least metaphorically, I don't know that this is physically true. I don't know enough about donkeys to know, but definitely metaphorically, they are untamed, they're selfish, they're unwilling to work or be of assistance to anyone. There's this story with Maimonides, with the Rambam, that who of course, as we know, was also the head physician for the Sultan of Egypt. And there was once this argument that broke out, and the Rambam took the position that animals are always instinctive. You cannot train animals to be the same as human beings. And I guess there were some other scholars that were in the court of the Sultan that actually felt that you could. And they had some research done on this. And so the Sultan decided this would be good entertainment. So he told the other scholars that they should train a whole bunch of cats. He said, come, show us, see what you can do. So they set a date for a big banquet. And the way that they said it was that these cats were going to be the wait staff, the waiters and the waitresses for the feast. I don't know if they dressed them up in bow ties and aprons, but that's definitely the way the story goes in my mind. And sure enough, they all came parading in. They were trained to walk on their hind legs and to use one of their front paws and hold the platter and come walking in. Everybody is so cute, so cute. If it was today, I'd be taking selfies and pictures and posting them online and social media and likes and the whole shebang, right? And the Rambam waits and he waits and he waits. And at the right, perfect, opportune moment, he stuck his hand in his pocket and he pulled out a mouse. He just let it loose. And boom, crash came all the platters, and the cats went scurrying off, all chasing the mouse. I think that is the ultimate difference between a human being and a child. Think about it. When do we call people children? When do we say you're acting like a child? Right? What happens? By the way, let's even back up. If you try telling your spouse one day you're acting like a child, right? They'll be extremely offended. Hold on a second. A child is like a beautiful angel and a delicate flower. What's the problem with being called a child? The problem with being called a child is because we all know inherently that children are born selfish. Children are born not overcoming their own desires for someone else. And by you telling me I'm a child, what you're telling me is I haven't grown out of that I still only want myself. A child grabbing a toy from another child is forgivable. It's a teachable moment, but it's forgivable, right? An adult, what happens if an adult is driving down the street and sees that they can sneak in and take somebody else's parking spot before they could take it? You jerk, you animal, right? It's the same exact thing. What happened? Because an adult is expected to overcome their instincts. Sure, we know that selfishly you want the parking spot and you don't care about anyone else, but we live in a society and there are rules that we follow, there are mannerisms that we follow, etc. Right? Imagine this is my favorite example. Imagine walking into a room, right? An adult, 35-year-old woman walking into a room, 30 people there. It's a nice dinner party. Everybody's sitting around class. She goes, "I am so beautiful." Right? This is ridiculous. A child walks into a room. If your 2-year-old walks into the room and says, everybody giggles, "Oh, she's so cute. She's so cute. Take a look at what she said." Why? Because we understand that children are inherently selfish and they're still learning and they're growing up, and et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, as our children grow up, we tolerate it less and less. Right? If your 15-year-old walks into the room and says, "I'm so beautiful," or your 12-year-old, which is just on the cusp of learning this, you start to say, "Hey, I got to talk to them about it." If a child says, "I don't want to clean up because I don't like cleaning up," again, it's a teachable moment, but we understand where they're coming from. If an adult shirks their responsibilities, try at work one day, everybody had their assignments over the weekend, then you come back and you're like, "Oh, I just didn't do it. I didn't feel like doing it." Right? Are you kidding me? You can't live in a society like that. Children are inherently, the point that we're making here is that children are inherently more selfish. And as we grow older, we are expected to grow out of that behavior. But as we know, none of us ever fully grow out of it. I'm sure all of us can point to certain moments or certain stories or certain times when we actually feel that same childishness, that same selfishness bubbling up. And sometimes we're good at holding it back, and sometimes we're not. Sometimes we're in the mood, and sometimes we're not. Sometimes we're hungry or hangry or whatever it is, and we're not, right? This growth from being a child to being an adult doesn't happen naturally. We need to be educated to acquire a new and adult personality, to figure out how to bite back on our natural instincts, as animalistic as they may be, as wild donkey-like as they may be, and actually learn to do that. And we don't learn that naturally. We only learn that from parenting. Isn't it interesting that we are the only species, speaking of differences between children and between animals and human beings, we are the only species that actively parents our children. To the best of my understanding, even the most intelligent creatures out there, the chimpanzees and the dolphins, etc., they don't actively spend time teaching their children this is right, this is wrong, morality, and this, whatever. We're the only ones that have this job. We give birth to a child, and now that's it. Now we have this job for life. For the next 20, 25 years, we have to educate the child, right? What are we doing? What are we doing? In one word, if we want to sum it up, we are trying to teach our children not to just act on every instinct, that they should have self-control or self-improvement or self-growth to one degree or another. Where are we here? Gracie, can you read for us, please? On page 35, we're holding text 9. And this is our Rebbe summarizing what in his view is education. Go ahead.
Okay. The whole point of education is to change the child's habitual nature. Children by nature do whatever they see fit without any restraints. In the words of the verse, Genesis 8:21, The impulse, quote, the impulse of the heart of man is evil from his youth, end quote. Children must therefore be trained to set boundaries and change their habitual natures until they attain sovereignty of mind over heart.
Thank you, Gracie. And in a nutshell, that is the verb of parenting. Education is about teaching our children the art of self-mastery, the art of being of self-discipline, being able to control ourselves and being able to actually improve as human beings. Yes, I know I want to do that. I know I used to want to do that, but now I don't do that anymore. I've gotten over that negative behavior. I've gotten over that negative character trait, etc. You know, there's an oft-quoted refrain that is to be respected in every other relationship besides the parent-child one. And unfortunately, especially in America, too many people try to apply that same quote to parenting. It is the line, accept me for who I am, not what you expect me to be, right? Think about that in the context of, for example, a marriage, right? Or even before a marriage. You know, people are they're dating, getting to know each other. That's a very healthy thing. Accept me for who I am. Sure, help me grow, but you have to be able to accept me for who I am. Don't create a model of some sort of spouse that you want in your mind, then accept me to conform to that. That's a very, very healthy thing. Two friends, very healthy thing. Colleagues, a very healthy thing. The one place where it is completely inappropriate and misapplied is parenting. For a child to turn to a parent and say, or even for a parent to think this way about a child, that we should be accepting them for who they are and not what we expect them to be, is completely wrong. Now, this, by the way, is one of the places where we have to keep in mind the foundations from lesson 1. If these expectations are based on our own ego, I want to have a child who plays the violin amazingly, now we have a problem, right? Because now the expectations are not for the child's best interest. But to go to the other extreme and say, I'm going to have no expectations of my child, that's a very, very unhealthy world for a child to grow up in. In fact, it could even be argued as saying absolutely the opposite. If a child, let's take a theoretical conversation. If a child turns to a parent and says, accept me for who I am and not what you expect me to be, the parent's response, again, this is just theoretically, I don't think this is a conversation that parents often have with their children, but the answer is absolutely not. I love you and accept you the way you are, but I also believe in you more than you perhaps believe in yourself in this context. I believe that you can grow as a human being and you can be better than you are. One way of looking at this, absolutely. I love you and accept you for who you are today, but I want you to know that I will not accept that same standard for tomorrow. Tomorrow I want you to be smarter. Tomorrow I want you to be better. Tomorrow I want you to be even more of a master at self-control, etc. And in order to achieve that tomorrow, we need to work on that today. Why do I think this is the key this type of education is the key to any sort of success in life? Why is self-discipline at the key to everything? Because if you go back to exercise 1 and you start to look at the things, any of the outcomes that you want your child to be, in both categories, by the way, whether it's a value you want your child to have, or whether it's a state of mind that you want your child to have, or whether it's even just an outcome. You want your child to be rich. In order to become rich, one of the most crucial elements to success is going to be self-discipline. It's going to be self-mastery, to be able to control yourself and not just act based on your instincts. You know why? Because you're going to wake up on a morning when you have to work very hard in order to make money, and you're going to want to just sleep in. You're going to want to say to yourself, I want to just go to this party. And you have to be able to tell yourself, no, I'm going to be responsible. I'm not going to do that. Pick any one of them. We can scroll back and see some of the things that people said. Dr. Avshin was talking about being an observant Jew. For sure, it takes self-discipline, right? If you want your child to grow up Jewish and going to shul, that's going to take self-discipline. It's at the core of anything. To be independent, right? We're going to talk about that a lot in lesson 4. Lesson 4 is going to be all about how to imbue independence in our children. But for sure, key number 1 is self-discipline. The children who stay at home and live with their parents and are unable to be independent, it's because they don't have no self-discipline. Maybe that's why they don't have a house. Maybe that's why they don't have a job. Maybe that's why they don't have a relationship. In relationships, self-discipline comes first. To be socially competent or happily married or a family person, you need to have self-discipline. Think about it. I've even begun to speak to my children as young as they are now. I've already begun to speak to them about this. Think about the people that you like most. Any person that you have a relationship with, I guarantee you, at the core of it, if you boil it down to why you like them, one of the things is going to be because you like the fact that they don't just do whatever they want. Sometimes they do something for you. They think about you, which is not something that they want to do. They act against their instincts, right? It's the key of everything. To be a good person, a caring person, a kind person requires self-discipline. To be successful, to be educated, to have a good job, to run a company requires self-discipline. At the core of all of them is self-discipline. This is why we have this beautiful quote from Teddy Roosevelt on the screen. The one quality which sets one man apart from another is not talent, formal education, intellectual brightness. I can add here, the home that he's born into, none of it. It's self-discipline. In other words, you can be born into the richest household, which spends the most money on education, and yada, yada, etc. But if nobody spends time teaching you to be self-disciplined, you will not be successful in any area of life. So what is the most valuable gift we can give our children? We can give them money. We can sponsor their college education. We can give them skills. We can make sure they have they're playing sports, that they're playing music, and those are all good things to gift to our children. But those will all pale in comparison to the biggest value we can give our children, which is the capacity for self-transformation, to be able to grow, to be able to control ourselves. Now, I want to take a moment to just give a couple of disclaimers here, because sometimes when we go down this route of like self-discipline and parenting the verb and getting all involved in our children and teaching them self-discipline, etc., we, as usual, when we're trying to make one point, we tend to get a little carried away. And I want to take a moment to make a couple of disclaimers. One of them I made already. Okay. This is what we were just talking about here before. This is the one I'm looking for here. This one here. Let's not carry away. First of all, I want to talk about the fact that every single child has their own personality. We spoke about this earlier. Based on, quote, text 6, right? Educating a child as per their way. Even though we're saying every child needs self-discipline, different children are going to need different ways in order to educate them about their self-discipline. And we'll talk about that in a moment. And by the way, we're going to talk about that most in lesson 4. Why? Because we have to remember that there is inherently a godly soul within this human being. We're not just looking to say to them, okay, this is the cookie cutter shape that I need you to be, and that's it. This isn't the army or the Navy. We're not looking to create a whole bunch of robots and clones. No. This child can be independent and can have their own independent identity. But in their way, they are going to need to have self-discipline, and they're going to need to be able to control their base instincts. The second thing I want to talk about is that not everything needs to be changed. What do I mean by that? I think I'm stating the obvious, but it is a disclaimer I want to make. Children are also born with natural good talents. There are children that grow up with good, kind, they're kind children. Or they are, whatever, I don't know, they're typically good in class. Whatever it is. Not everything needs to be changed about a child. Just because we're parenting the verb here doesn't mean we're not going to allow for the child's own personality, and together with that goes their unique talents, right? And I think those things, once we identify them, we actually have to water. We have to help them grow. And finally, I think all of this is only one half of the picture. If we start to talk about a cookie cutter trait, maybe this is the same idea as I was saying earlier. If we start to talk, the issue really becomes once you start to paint a picture of a child and what they're supposed to look like. And if the child with self-discipline has a certain image in your head, we have to get rid of that, because then you will often be eliminating their unique talents, their unique identity, their own godly soul, and their positive traits. You will be telling them, no, don't do that, because that's not what self-discipline looks like in the cookie cutter shape that I have created for what a child needs to look like. So I guess what I'm getting to is that as parents, we really have a dual task. We have to water and preserve and cultivate the good talents and good traits that a child has, while at the same time saying to them, I want more. I want to push you more. I want you to grow in this area. This is an area where you have a negative trait or even a positive trait. I want you to take it even further. You were born and you have a natural tendency to chess. I would like you to grow, get even better at chess, right? Academia, shearing, whatever it is. I want you to take it a step further. There we have to grow and cultivate and water. And in the negative traits that we see within our children, we have to be able to, I don't know if eliminate them is the right word, but we have to be able to teach our children and give our children the tools to be able to overcome them. Okay. So right about now, with 30 minutes left of the class, the $1 million question is how? How? How do we help our children with self growth, with self-discipline? I see my child. He has an issue with anger management, let's say, right? Or he has an issue with coming on time. Whatever it is, what tools can I use to educate my child? The key to affecting self-transformation is going to be discipline. Now, when we say discipline, we don't mean the sense of punishment. We mean discipline in terms of the sense of self-control. We are going to need to teach our children to be disciplined people. How do we go about accomplishing this? How do we get our children to move from point A to point B and grow a little bit in their self-discipline? So we certainly cannot tame a wild donkey. Remember, in this aspect, we're looking at our children as wild donkeys. We certainly cannot tame a wild donkey by just sitting it down and convincing it of the error of its ways. This is a child we're talking about. They're 4, they're 6, they're 8. They don't necessarily have the intellectual capacity yet to understand this. And yet we still need to be parenting them from a very young age. We need to be teaching them the error of their ways. By talking to them is very often not going to work. So let's take a look at text 10. I will mention that while there is certain value in text 10, so let me set it up for a moment. Text 10 comes from a book called Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother. Can I get a raise of the hand if anybody has read this book or heard of this book? You have heard of it, Miriam? There you go. Battle Hymn for the Tiger Mother is a book written by Amy Chua, who was a child of Chinese immigrant parents. And when the book was published, and what she describes what in her words is typical for a Chinese immigrant parent. I encourage you to read at the back. There's like a full excerpt. We're just going to read a small excerpt here to get an idea. But there's a full excerpt from her book and the additional readings in the back of today's lesson. But when she published her book, there was huge backlash. It garnered like global media attention. Even like there was a lot of heated debates about parenting and culture and all that sort of thing. And it even provoked calls for Chua's arrest on child abuse charges. Can you imagine? The reasons that people were so upset about it can be seen very clearly if you read the whole book. But essentially, and by the way, in the back there, we also have one of the rebuttals that's written very properly, etc. But basically, she advocates consistent cookie cutter behavior, like just hammer it into the child over and over and over and over again. Now, the basic flaw with it is obviously that it rejects the notion of text 6. To educate each child according to their way, that each child needs to be educated in a specific way. But I think one of the things we can take away from it is discipline. So let's read text 10, but we are immediately going to contrast it with text 11, which is Rabbi Manis Friedman, who's a contemporary rabbi, who has a big YouTube channel. For those of you that like it, I'll link it in the he's got lots of parenting videos. He's got lots of lectures, and he's got lots of marriage lectures, all that sort of thing. He's a profound rabbi, Chabad rabbi. We're gonna contrast what she says, and then we'll see how Rabbi Manis Friedman takes this and just makes a few adjustments. So let's start with Miriam. I think you said you read Amy Chua, right? If you can read for us, please.
Yes.
Text 10.
Discussed it with my husband too. But discipline is usually seen as a necessary evil.
No. Start with text 10.
10. Sorry about that.
From Amy Chua, and then we'll move on to text 11.
Okay. Sorry about that. From Amy Chua. What Chinese parents understand is that nothing is fun until you're good at it. To get good at anything, you have to work. And children on their own never want to work, which is why it is crucial to override their preferences. This often requires fortitude on the part of the parents because the child will resist. Things are always hardest at the beginning, which is where Western parents tend to give up. But if done properly, the Chinese strategy produces a virtuous circle. Tenacious practice is crucial for excellence. Once a child starts to excel at something, whether it's math, piano, pitching, or ballet, he or she gets praise, admiration, and satisfaction. This builds confidence and makes the once not fun activity fun. This in turn makes it easier for the parent to get the child to work even more.
So she's making the point that discipline, when it comes to children, that's our role as parents. It's our obligation to tell a child, yes, start taking piano lessons. I know it's not fun, but take them for a year, take them for 2 years, and then slowly it'll become fun. As you start to get better and better at something, you will become more on board with it. Right now, while there are flaws in taking this approach to its extreme, at its core, this idea is true. Children are wild donkeys. They have instincts, and therefore they don't want to do something that's going to have a long-term impact on their lives, etc. And it requires a certain discipline from the parents. But let's take a look at Rabbi Manis Friedman's points. Miriam, if you can continue, please. Text 11 on page 37, you'll see the additional element that he adds. Go ahead.
I do want to mention it's pretty funny in the book. His second daughter completely rebels against her. But anyway, let's keep going.
Okay.
Discipline is usually seen as a necessary evil. You're young, you're irresponsible, you're ignorant, so you have to obey your parents. If you don't follow instruction, you might get hit by a truck or you might burn down the house. If that's what discipline means, then naturally, as soon as kids get a little smarter, they start screaming, how do I get out of this? Hasidic teaching sees it very differently. Obedience is not a yoke that you don't want. It's a talent that you never outgrow. Every human being has limitations and handicaps. Some people can't function before they have their morning coffee. Some people can't function after 8 o'clock at night. It's past my bedtime, I can't. When it's cold outside or wet, I can't. I'm not in the mood, I can't. There are 100 different things that keep me from functioning. All that changes when you have discipline. Look at a soldier. Soldiers are trained to follow orders. But more importantly, soldiers are trained to be free from all sorts of petty restrictions so that they can follow an order. Whether it's hot or cold outside, irrelevant. Uphill, downhill, irrelevant. How much does the pack weigh? 40 pounds, 60 pounds, 80 pounds? Irrelevant. For if it needs to happen, a soldier makes it happen. The true discipline means freeing yourself, getting beyond the petty restrictions that limit average human beings and cause them to underfunction and underperform. Training a child through discipline doesn't mean I'm going to impose my will on you because you're not intelligent enough to know what's right or wrong. Yes, there are things the parent knows that a child doesn't, but there is much more to discipline than that. Let's consider the following scenario. You say to your child, put away your books. The child says, I don't want to. So you say, okay, but you still have to put away your books. What are you teaching your child? You're saying, you don't want to, but that is not a crippling thing. Do it anyway. You're training the child to go beyond his or her limitations.
Thank you, Miriam. I think in a nutshell, if I were to just boil down, what exactly is Rabbi Friedman saying? What is the main point that he's making? And he wasn't contrasting necessarily Amy Chua, but we are here in this lesson. I think he's making one maybe slightly nuanced difference than what she's saying, but I think it changes the whole game. What is that? She is saying, listen, children are stupid. Children are wild donkeys. They're young. They don't know. They're instinctive. It's our job to do things for them for their good. So therefore, that's where discipline comes in. Or in the words of Manis Friedman, a necessary evil. It's not fun. Telling our children what to do is not fun, but we do it because we believe that this is what's in their best interest, etc. Now, as the child gets older, and maybe they get a little smarter, it's like, oh, but I know what's even better for me, or I know how to outsmart your discipline system, etc. What happens? It stops to work. What if instead of looking at discipline as a necessary evil, we look at discipline as an end in and of itself? Not as a means to an end, not as a means to keeping our children safe, not as a means, but discipline as a value, right? That's where this statement starts to come in. You don't want to? No problem. I understand you don't want to. I understand that it's hard. No problem. There's nothing wrong with empathizing with the child, but you still have to. You know what you're doing in that moment? You're not getting the child to clean their room. You're not getting the child to daven mincha or whatever it is that you're trying to impart to your child. Those are all side benefits. What you're really doing is teaching your child the ultimate thing a child can ever be taught: self-discipline. How to say to themselves, I know I don't want to do something, but I'm going to do it anyways. You know, there's obviously the famous proverb, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, but teach a man to fish and he'll eat for a lifetime. I think the same thing is true with the gift of chinuch, which is usually, in English, is usually translated as education. But I think it specifically means, like chinuch means to train someone or to discipline them. That's literally what the word would mean. Education is more in the realm of limud, which means to learn or study, etc. It's more of an academic pursuit. Chinuch, which is the English word, the Hebrew word for education, really means to train someone, to mold someone. What are we doing here? We're training the child. We're giving the child practice in the realm of self-discipline. as if we're a sergeant training a soldier. Why? Because then you're gifting your child with the ultimate gift, helping them move from point A to point B, or point B to point C, or point C to point D, from becoming a wild donkey to becoming a mature adult. From not being a child anymore, from not being the person who walks into a room and says, I'm beautiful, to instead being an adult that actually understands that I can do something even though it's not exactly what I want to do right now. When does this start? Believe it or not, it doesn't start at 10 or at 8 or at 15 as cognition starts to come in. It actually starts at a very, very early age. Sarah, can you read for us, please? Text 12. This is from the Midrash on Mishle, on Proverbs from King Solomon. Beth,
Yeah,
can
sure.
you read for us, please? Text
Oh.
12.
Want Beth to read it or me? This
I
is
said
Sarah.
Beth, but whoever's talking, why don't you read?
Oh.
Go ahead.
Okay, sorry, Beth. You can go next.
Yeah, that's fine. Go ahead. Sarah, go ahead.
Educate a child according to his way, even when he grows old. He will not turn away from it. Like an ox that was not trained to plow when young, that finds it too difficult to do so later. Like a sapling in the vineyard that can be fixed when young and moist, but cannot be remedied once it hardens.
So understanding every child is important. And we have to understand every child is unique. And we need to consider every one of our children, take into account where they are at in their self-discipline and what they're capable of growing. We have to set them up for success, not set them up for failure, etc. But we have to craft a plan to constantly be prodding our children to achieve and accomplish more and more and more. Wherever they are, they have to be doing a little bit more. Because if not, it's us that's failing them as parents. How do we do this? So often it's simply a matter of making rules and establishing goals, right? We do this all the time, all the time as parents. I know some of your parenting styles on the group, and some of you do this already, giving a child specific jobs that you know is within their capability to do. You have to make your bed every morning. It's your job to wash the dishes after supper on Mondays and Wednesdays or whatever it is, right? Clear the table, set the table, clear your plate from the table. All of these sorts of things are all things that could be done by you. They could be done by someone else. The child could even figure out a clever way to do it. But just teaching them that even though you want to do this, you need to do this is a value. One of my favorite things to talk to my children about is our help. We have 2 children, Kanai, both parents are working. There's help in the house, right? We have a housekeeper who will come and clean, etc. Right? And my children know that my biggest pet peeve is if they make a mess and then they say, "Oh, the housekeeper will clean it." I'm like, "Oh no, you don't. That's not what the housekeeper is here for. The housekeeper is here because we don't have enough time to do all the jobs that we need to do. She helps with the laundry, she helps with this, no problem." Right? But you have an obligation to do certain things. So your bed doesn't get made by the housekeeper. You're the one who makes your bed. It's your obligation. Not because she can't do it. She could do it. We could pay her more money and she'll stay for longer and she'll do all those other jobs. But you have a responsibility. You're part of this house. And by doing this is not because the bed has to get made by my child. I could make the child, but God knows it would take quicker at my children's age, right? God knows that clearing the table often results in more, especially with my children who are still young, right? But even as they get older, it doesn't get done as well as you would like it to get done, right? They clean the table, they don't clean it as well. But the value, the gift that you are giving them, even if after they go to sleep, you're going to re-clean the table again, the gift that you've given them by saying to them, no, you need to control yourself, you need to work against your instincts is priceless. And the same thing could go for anything else. The examples in the video, volunteering at the soup kitchen, going to shul. Yeah, you don't want to, but you need to. He's become a lot more politicized. But years and years ago, like 15 years ago, I heard a story from Dennis Prager. Dennis Prager grew up, I don't know if an Orthodox home, but definitely close to Orthodox, etc. And he was once talking about how he was in a class and he had a Rebbe, he had a teacher who they were davening mincha. They were praying the afternoon service. And Dennis Prager walked over to young Dennis Prager walks over to his teacher's table and he says to him, I don't want to daven mincha. So he says he'll never forget this till the day he dies. And he said this was a moment of education for him. His teacher looked at him, and his Hebrew name is Shmuel. He said, Shmuel Prager doesn't want to daven mincha. So what? That was the sum total of the whole statement. And then he went on to daven mincha. And he shares this story 10, 15 years ago. Today he's in his 60s, 70s, I don't know. So then he was in his 50s. He's sharing this story 40 years later. Right? Why? Because the impact of somebody telling you, I know you don't want to do it. I hear you don't want to do it, but you need to do it anyways. That's a gift to give a child. It's not a way to achieve a result. That itself is the gift we can give a child. Whether it's calling grandparents, whether it's setting a Shabbat table, whatever it is. And at times, by the way, our words alone are obviously not enough. some people mentioned something in the comments that I want to address in just a second. At times, your words will not be enough. And definitely the carrot and the stick is important. That's fine. And I think it's part of the time-honored Jewish tradition. Let's read about it from Maimonides, and then I want to address some of the questions in the comments. Beth, I think you were next, right? So if you would like to read for us, please, text 13. This is Maimonides on reward and punishment when it comes to children, consequences and incentives.
Beth is going to let me read the Sephardic
Go ahead,
rabbi.
Matt.
Imagine a young child who was brought to a teacher to learn Torah, which is the child's greatest good. But due to youth and immaturity, the child does not appreciate this. So the teacher needs to motivate the child with age-appropriate incentives. So the teacher should say, read your lesson and I will give you nuts, figs, or honey. When the child grows older and the sweets are no longer attractive, the teacher should say, read your lesson and I will buy you nice shoes or attractive clothes. Then as the child's mind reaches full maturity, the teacher should say, study and you will become a leader and scholar, and people will respect you and rise in your honor. All this is shameful. For the purpose of wisdom is not to receive honor from people, nor to bring monetary profit. We should study wisdom for no other purpose than to know it. Yet this is for the children's good, for it gives them the motivation and gets them in the habit of studying and observing the Torah, and from this they will be roused to know the truth and do it out of love. Thus our sages have said, we should study and observe the Torah, even if not for its own sake, because doing it for ulterior motives will bring us to do it for its own sake.
Thank you, Matt. So let's take a closer look at the text we just read. Hold on a second. The Rambam is advocating that we should tell children, you should daven mincha today, or you should be kind to your friend, or you should be on time to school because or you should get 100 on your test paper because I'm going to give you a candy, because you're going to get some sort of trip that you wanted to get. I don't understand. Aren't we trying to educate them in truth? Aren't we trying to bring up children to be able to do things for the right reason? We should tell them they should get 100 on their test because this will serve them well as they grow older, right? Because they'll know the information that they need to know. We should tell them that they should daven mincha because this is the right thing to do, to pray to God. We should tell them that they should share with their friends because they would like their friends to share with them, because Ahavat Yisrael is a big value. Whatever it is, why are we distracting them with punishments or with consequences or incentives which are a carrot or a stick? Are we trying to educate them that that's why they're doing the mitzvah in order to get the candy? And when the candy is not there, what happens? I think what the Rambam is saying is that these things are okay when you're trying to inculcate self-discipline. In other words, often the main thing standing in the way of a child learning self-discipline is actually doing it. And they need a little bit of a prod, a poke, a nudge in the right direction. Not a nudge. A nudge is somebody who, right? Nudge is like a clutch. A nudge in the right direction to get them from point A to point B, a little bit more of self-growth. But what that affects is how you punish or how we give a reward, right? It's not, wow, you really like that candy, or look at the amazing candy Johnny just got for putting away his toys. You should also put away your toys. No, the main lesson is you thought you couldn't do it. Now you see that you could. Why? What happens? You tell a child to put away their books. You tell them to put away their backpack, hang it on the shelf, and not leave it on the side. Very often, especially the younger they are, the answer is, I can't. I just can't. What you're trying to say is, hold on a second. You can't? If you can't do that, then you also don't have energy now to go outside and play. You can't go outside and play until you put away your backpack. That's not a punishment. That's you. And by the way, that's where we should use the most of our words. After they do it, you say to them, see, all of a sudden when I introduced the candy, it was very easy for you to do what you needed to do. So it turns out you could. What you're really trying to show them is you could have that self-discipline. You could get from point A to point B and push yourself forward in terms of self-control, in terms of self-improvement. That's the same thing true about the carrot, and that's the same thing true about the stick. And I think it's very, very important that as we're doing that with our children, even though we're using rewards, we should emphasize to them that the point of the reward wasn't because you wanted this end result. It wasn't because you wanted the books picked up. That's why they got a candy, because you wanted the books picked up. No, they're getting a candy because you're trying to show them that they can and should pick up the books, because that's a value that they should have to be able to discipline themselves. They didn't want to, and they did it anyways. Okay, now, having said this, I think it is very, very important to remember a few points. And I think this is what some of the people in the comments are getting to, particularly Dr. Avshin Achavan. So I'll read his question and then I'll address it. He says, can you kindly cover the damage of not living a life of self-discipline? So I think we did that already. In order to be happy, You have to have self-discipline in order to be successful in business. You have to have self-discipline in order to be successful in Torah and mitzvot. When you grow older, you need to have self-discipline. In order to be successful in anything in life, self-discipline is at the core of it all. I think Teddy Roosevelt's quote earlier spoke a lot to that. But the second half of his question, obviously, we are not talking about being a Gestapo with the kids. I think that's very, very important to talk about. This notion that you're kind of like the policeman of the house is a very, very crucial thing to stick away from. Obviously, right? And not, by the way, because we don't like to feel like a policeman or we don't like to feel like a Gestapo. You know, there's a quote I once read. It's a beautiful quote. I actually wrote it down to say it at the end of today's class, but I'll say it now. Parenting isn't always fun. Real parenting isn't always fun, but that's our job. And when the process doesn't excite you, remember the results most certainly will. So the reason we don't want to be a Gestapo or we don't want to be a policeman, I'm going to use the word policeman. I think it's a little bit less triggering, at least for me as a Jew. The reason we don't want to be a policeman in our own home is not because we don't like to feel that way. We're happy to feel a little bit uncomfortable because we know that we're in it for the long game, and as long as what we're doing is good for our children, that's good. But let's remember that when we are going to feel like a policeman, if the children feel that we are a policeman, they are never going to change. You're never going to be effective. And let's go back to lesson 1. Remember lesson 1? The main goal that we introduced was everything that we do, the emotion you have to feel, even if you're doing the same action twice, the emotion behind it, the outlook behind it has to be, I'm doing this for my child's best interest. Whenever we are disciplining our children and we're doing so for their best interest, trust me, it comes across that way. They might not feel it 100%, but they will not feel that you are like a policeman. They might feel like you're a drill sergeant. I love that Rabbi Manis Friedman used the analogy of a drill sergeant. You know, when soldiers that are honored with some sort of honor, right? When they get up and they say thank you to all the people that made me who I am, whatever, right? Very often they'll mention their commanders and their generals, etc. Even though they demanded of them beyond the human comprehension. But I've never heard anybody successful get up and thank the policeman who arrested me. Policemen don't do things with the person who they're arresting's best good or best interest at heart. Nobody ever gets that feeling from a policeman. Tell me the last time that you got pulled over and a policeman gave you a fat ticket for speeding or whatever it is. I'm not accusing any of you of speeding, but theoretically speaking, in case you got a ticket for parking in the wrong spot, right? Whatever it is. When's the last time you looked at the officer and you said, "Thank you so much for keeping our city safe"? You don't say that. The reason you don't say that is because you don't get that feeling from the police officer. The police officer comes down as somebody, he's not in it for you, he's in it to enforce the rules, that's it. But a drill sergeant is different. A sergeant, a commanding officer is different. And I think as parents, we're a little bit more like commanding officers in that way, obviously with the added element of love. But you often, soldiers will talk with their commanding officers with love, with reverence, with a certain parental-like figure, by the way. And I think that's because they appreciate that when the soldier sees that when the sergeant sees that the soldier just did 100 push-ups and he says do 100 more, I think that the soldier feels that the drill sergeant is doing that because he has his best interest at heart, because he's pushing him to be the best soldier that he can be. I think that's the attitude we're looking for in our children. Now, Rome wasn't built in a day. It's not going to happen overnight. Obviously, this is a step-by-step process. And part of text 6, which was educating each child according to their way, means appreciating what is an achievable next step for my child. This I can demand of them, right? So your 6-year-old, you can demand that they make their bed, that they put their toys away, right? But you can't necessarily demand of them to help you set the Shabbat table. They simply don't have not even the motor skills, never mind the full comprehension of how to set a Shabbat table. But as they turn 10 years old, you can ask them to help clear the table, right? You can ask them to set the table or whatever age-appropriate activity there is for each of these ages. Does that make sense? I hope I addressed, Dr. Afshin, I hope I addressed your that point that you were asking about. Okay. And I think now, as we conclude the lesson, we have to return to 2 things that we discussed earlier. Number 1, remember that question for discussion that we asked earlier? Why isn't role modeling enough to transmit values to our children? I think that there are really 2 answers to this question, right? Why is the noun? Why is role modeling, giving our children the gift of proper values and perspectives by watching us? Why is that not enough? I think that there's 2 answers to this question. Number 1, is because when we role model and our children copy us, even if it's the best value in the world, they're not learning self-control. Self-control has to be actively taught. And I think that's one of the big things we have to remember about the verb. Proactive parenting means now we're teaching our children the tools to act upon the value system that they would have just copied as monkey see, monkey do. Okay? And number two is sometimes children need a nudge. They need a nudge in the right direction, and they need help getting from point A to point B. They need help maybe even understanding what it is that they're capable of right now. What is their achievable point B that they can get to? And I think that's very, very important. So that's why when it comes to parenting, in the how of parenting, right? Last week we discussed the why of parenting, the foundations of it all, etc. But this week we're discussing the how. We have to remember that there's two big responsibilities that we have. Number one, to act as good role models for our children. And that's not an all or nothing sum game. We're never going to be perfect human beings, but we can always get better at something. And number two, we have to get involved on a proactive level, teaching our children certain tools for life, but specifically the tool of self-discipline. By the way, I think this can also be used as an exercise. You know what? I think that's the exercise we have at the end of the class. So I was just jumping ahead of myself in my head. Before we do that, I'd like to revisit, if we can, the story of the previous Rebbe. Right? Remember that story? Previous Rebbe is sharing melon with his friends, 7 years old. And his father says to him, he saw he was doing it begrudgingly, so he sat him down and he taught him the difference between tov ayin hu yivarach, which is a Jewish value, that someone with a good eye, with a generous eye, is blessed, and ra ayin, what it means to have a negative eye, that you begrudgingly give to other people, you don't want to give to other people, etc. Let's revisit that story. Here you have a parent, okay, who sees a child, and the child is doing something good, but he sees that there's a little potential for growth in the child. Possibly what's happening here is not possibly, what definitely was happening here, because we see this already in the reaction of the previous Rebbe, of Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, the child who was 7 years old at the time. What's happening here is his father is saying to him, I see that you're doing something good, but I also see that there's potential for growth within you. And I want to teach you the act of being able to be in self-control, to be able to grow, even when you might be satisfied, or you might be tempted to be satisfied with the situation that you're in. And I think there's no more beautiful parenting than that. Think what happens. He sits down, he has a conversation with his child, and he teaches his child, I know you did something good, but there is room for you to grow in this aspect. And I believe in you. I believe, right, this is the parent talking. I believe that you as a 7-year-old, and knowing who you are and knowing how much you share, that it's time for you to grow, to be better tomorrow than you are today, by not just sharing, but sharing even non-begrudgingly. Would that have been a good idea for my 3-year-old daughter? Probably not. She's not holding there yet. Both in age, both in stage, maybe in personality, maybe in her growth. But I would never say that to my child right now in my stage. But the previous Rebbe's father, the Rebbe Rashab, said to the Frierdiker Rebbe, he said it to him, and look what the reaction was. He actually sat down and it bothered him. He actually, till he physically threw up from it, because this affected him in such a deep way. And 30, 40, 50 years later, he's sharing the story. He's saying, this is education. These words stuck with me for many generations and stayed with me. That I have to be someone who gives, and I have to give with a tov ayin, with a good eye, with a generous eye, not begrudgingly. This was a value that his father actively got involved with, not just, obviously, I'm sure he was a good role model in this behavior as well, but he also got involved on an active level, teaching him this and not being satisfied with wherever he is, but helping push him to one stage a little further in his self-mastery. I think God gives us children. I want to conclude with this idea. God gives us children and entrusts us with the task of raising them. And raising them, in short, in this lesson, one of the ways we can put raising children is pushing them to maximize their great potential. In other words, children are born as wild donkeys, but internally they are delicate and beautiful angels, holy angels. And we have to help them reveal that hidden angel from within them. To get rid of the facade of the wild donkey that they're born with, which every single human being is born with, and release the inner angel that they have within them. And at every step along the way, as they shed one layer of wild donkey and another layer of wild donkey, and they start to emerge as a beautiful, wonderful adult, it's our job to push them, to prod them, right? They will always say it's always easier, it's always lazier, it's always wild donkey-esque, right? It's always instinctive to not want to grow. But if we are there as parents for their best interest and we push them and prod them to grow and to grow and to grow, then what we could do is amazing. We're not policemen, we're drill sergeants. And if we do it in that way, then that soldier that would have done 100 push-ups is now going to do 200 push-ups. That child who would have just cheered will now cheer with a generous heart, etc. And trust me, when that's done in a week or a month from now, there's going to be something else to grow on. I'm going to keep pushing him, right? When he's done learning to shear, I want him to shear with all his heart. And to the next stage and to the next stage. And I want to conclude with this exercise on page 42. Such a beautiful exercise. I think it's amazing because this is practical for everybody, no matter how old your children are and no matter what you're learning with your children, okay? Start by identifying something that your child does that you think is negative. That you think that they can use, not negative is a strong word, that you think they can use improvement in. A habit, a character trait, somewhere where they need to improve, okay? And now the first thing you need to ask is, how can you improve yourself in that area? So let's say, for example, the issue is anger. I have a 5-year-old son, he has difficulty controlling his behavior when he's angered, right? The first question we have to start with is, am I being a good role model for this behavior? What can I do this week? And by the way, I hope this is something you'll all work on this week, practically. Try to write it down. What's something, a negative character trait that you'd like to move the needle on with your child, right? And say, okay, that's number one, that's negative character trait. Number two, what am I going to do to grow in that regard? I'm going to read a book on anger management. I'm going to learn how to reduce some of the anger in my life. I'm going to schedule weekly discussions with my spouse to discuss my or our progress in anger management, whatever it is, and brainstorm how we can further improve, etc. Right? And then when you're done with that, now identify a way that you're going. So that was parenting the noun. And now identify parenting the verb. What can I do? How can I start focusing on my child's tendency, let's say in this instance, to throw things around when they're angered, right? I'm going to explain to my child that such behavior is not appropriate for the big boy, for the big girl. I'm not going to tolerate it anymore, right? It doesn't make a difference what provokes his anger. Maybe I'll tell him if a week passes and he didn't, right? The carrot. Maybe if a week passes and he didn't throw anything or he didn't, whatever the negative behavior is, I'm going to give him something. Or maybe the next time he does it, I'm going to tell him you have to have this and this consequence in order to help you learn, right? Again, with the focus not on the consequence, with the focus on the behavior that we're trying to inculcate within them. You'll tell them, you're struggling with this thing. This is the reason why we have to work on this. And I know that you don't want to, and I know that it's hard for you, but until you learn, this is going to help you. Taking away time on the Xbox, right? Whatever your version of a consequence or a punishment is, in order to help, and remember, the language is key, in order to help nudge you in the right direction in terms of growth in this regard. I think this is such a beautiful, this is like such an actionable exercise. When I saw it, that they had this design for this class, I was like, this is perfect. Because it does make a difference what it is. They're being rude. They don't say please or thank you. They throw things. They talk to parents disrespectfully. They're late. They don't clear their plate for the anything. First of all, identify within yourself. Take active steps to improve, and then next, figure out a concrete way of something that you're going to do with them. And I think this concludes today's lesson. Please turn your attention to the video screens for a summary of today's lesson.
Key points, Lesson 2. 1. Parenting isn't primarily something we do, but something we are. Parents are always parenting, no matter what they are doing. Children are always watching and taking note. 2. Children tend to absorb their parents' values, both good and bad, and emulate their behaviors. Therefore, if we see our child struggling in a certain area, one of the most effective things we can do to help is to work on improving ourselves in that area. 3. A child is born naturally selfish and lazy and without the capacity for mindful self-control. The primary goal of child rearing is to wean children off their default nature and help them acquire self-mastery and a new adult personality. 4. Self-mastery is crucial to success in every area of life: material, social, intellectual, moral, and spiritual. Self-mastery means freeing oneself from the petty restrictions that limit many people and cause them to underfunction and underperform. 5. We train our children to be disciplined by pushing them beyond their comfort zones, setting a high standard for them and insisting that they reach it. 6. When instructions alone will not suffice, parents should employ incentives to get their children to achieve important goals. Reward and/or negative consequence can be driving forces behind the greater goal of self-mastery. 7. Role modeling fosters proper values and aspirations. Proactive parenting and careful planning are required, however, to give children the gifts of self-discipline and self-mastery necessary for them to live up to these values and aspirations.
Thank you all for joining us for lesson 2 of the art of parenting, parent, the noun, and the verb. And we look forward to you joining us next week for lesson 3, titled On Good Authority. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.